Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I was asked to speak in German, so if you don't understand German, please take on your headphones. I think it's due to the German media, so these, if you're familiar with the German media landscape, people are not really used to see German politicians talk in English, so I think it's therefore. Yeah, you're laughing, but you see, all the the international movies are translated. They have undertext in Germany. Therefore, everyone hears German translation in the international movies and reads the German undertext, which means that our school English is nearly forgotten after school. And smaller countries like Denmark or Netherlands, which have not 80 million people watching television in the same language or the German language, they then are better in English. So that might be the reason that we do now my speech, or I do my speech now in German. Liebe Annalena, vielen Dank für die Konferenz.
Thank you very much, Annalena, for this conference, and thank you very much to the Foreign Office for the cooperation that we've had over the past 3.5 years. This conference, and I would go as far as to say German, European and international climate policy have been thought together and designed together. This may well be the last conference for Annalena Baerbock and me, and that's why I would like to take a more fundamental note. I would like to take a look back to the past 10 years of this conference and put this into the focus of the past weeks when we've had to recalibrate things. So behind many of the conflicts that we are seeing in the world, behind the many crises that we are trying to resolve in a diplomatic way, and behind the many crises and conflicts and wars, there is one main line of confrontation. So we all live in different countries, we have our own political culture, we all have our own history. So it would be wrong to say that history of one country is the same for other countries, and the same is true for Germany and for Europe. So the history of Germany, the mentality of Germans, is very much shaped by the 2 world wars that Germany started, that it waged on Europe and the world, and the many people who lost their lives. So this has then given rise to stable democracy, and there's a learned reticence against anything that is military. And that is right, because if you're too passionate about the military, if you think that wars can resolve conflicts, well, that is the kind of belief that waged a lot of war. But other countries won these wars and said their military is the guarantor of their freedom. This is true in Europe, and it will be the same internationally. So there are many diverse approaches to this. So what I will be saying is not to be misconstrued. Of course, I'm adopting a German perspective, but I don't want to tell you that we are right and that everything should be the way that we see it. Nevertheless, I think there is one line of confrontation that is not neutral, and that has increasingly come under pressure. It's the line of confrontation between freedom and force, violence. So we used to live in a world where we hoped that after the end of the rivalry between the West and the East, the world should be regarded as one, that we would have an international system of rules, that we would regard the world as one community. So we had a World Trade Organization, global climate agreements, global aid agreements within the umbrella of the UN, that we would diplomatically resolve conflicts between peoples. And we thought if we traded together, if we talked to each other, then we would all benefit. So that used to be the mindset after 1990. And I think today we have to see that this order that used to be called globalization, that this global world, this global family is, well, that it is a broken family. We're now seeing that geopolitics is guided by interests and spheres of influences. And sometimes the global thinking has already been pushed back. And often interests are being pursued using military force or violence. So this breaks the very root of what used to be our thinking, namely that peoples, nations could decide about their own fate in freedom, and that force and violence are now taking over. And there's an even deeper misunderstanding, namely that freedom does not mean the freedom to do anything, and that freedom does not mean the absence of rules. That's true in our private lives. So in the name of freedom, I will not do my housework, I will not look after my family, my partner. Well, then that's not a free relationship, it's an asocial relationship, and this is even more true within society. Of course, there are majorities, but minorities have the right to protection, and these should be guaranteed by government institutions, by the rule of law. So freedom does not mean that everyone is free to do whatever they want. Freedom means that you can freely decide about the rules at the national level, at the private level, and at international level. And this is an understanding that has broken, that has gone lost. So you can't just do anything. You need rules. And the freedom to change rules, to talk about others, this is something that has been lost. And in this way, the different attacks on freedom have one thing in common. Interests of a party are no longer being pursued within rules, discussions, conferences, and so forth, but using force. This may be easier for the one pursuing the violence, but nobody who is actually exercising power can be sure that they won't lose out sometime in the future. And once they lose out, they will no longer be interested in this system. And this actually means that there is an arms race going on. And history tells us that nothing will pursue, that empires will collapse, and that even the most powerful will be overcome. So the history of mankind or of humankind tells us that resolving conflicts via violence has only ever begot more violence and unhappiness. So what does anything that I've just said have to do with energy and climate policy? Well, everything from my point of view. I've said many times at this conference that Germany has learned the hard way that power is also something that is exercised in the field of energy and trade. This may be different among different countries, and again we have oil-producing, oil-exporting countries, and Germany and Europe are importing countries, so we buy oil and gas, but even for exporters it's not good to be dependent on one buyer. It's always good to diversify, both as an importer and also as an exporter. So this is what is needed. And diversification, building various trade relations, well, this means trading with one another. This idea of restoring security, reliability in our trading systems is different from actually forcing others into dependency. So Germany must not forget the high price that we've paid for our dependency. And other countries that have not been dependent should learn from Germany's bad example. And also, oil exporting countries should rethink their trade relations and should diversify. And this will perhaps bring us a bit closer to justice in the World Trade Organization and beyond. Second point, fossil fuels are often drivers of conflict, international conflicts as well. And in order to minimize these, there is one answer, and that is to wave fossil fuels goodbye, to electrify, because electricity, and especially electricity from renewables that is not coal-based or oil-based, but sun or geothermal energy-based, create security and resilience. This is how Germany was able to act within the past 3 years. So we've increased the share of renewables by around 40% to 60%, and it's allowed us to actually reduce our dependency on oil and gas imports. If you then look at the sectors that are not decarbonized yet, so heat transport, then you see that the production, the generation of renewables also increases security and stability within society. This also builds fresh revenue, because you're not losing the revenue to other countries, to exports. Countries that are building their energy systems should really look at this way, and I think this is the way forward. So it would be wrong to actually use fossil fuels in sun-rich countries, in Africa, for instance. So we should use our experience. So we used to benefit, well, the West used to benefit from fossil fuels, and it would be wrong to actually learn by that example. So in the past 3 years, we've really managed to do something that is incredible, and nobody would have believed this possible. If you look at the electricity grids, you find that we approved around 300 kilometers of electricity grids per year. We've reached 2,000 kilometers. If we look at onshore wind energy, we've increased our capacity from 1.5 to 10 gigawatts. And, well, for solar energy, demand is incredibly, it's going through the roof. And people are using low-cost electricity for their own use. So it really isn't all too difficult in a densely populated industrial country, but it is hard work. I won't deny that. And it also means living, tolerating conflict and resolving conflict. Apart from energy security and the price for renewables, and renewables are much cheaper than fossil fuels and also cheaper than new nuclear power plants, I would like to mention a third point, the main point of this conference, climate action. Of course, we need to resolve all these acute problems that we have at the moment, all these crises that you may be confronted with in your own countries and in your neighboring countries, things that make us lose sleep at night. But at the same time, we must not forget that we have one historic task. This political generation has the task of actually mitigating climate change. And if we look back 30 to 40 years, when we look back to this time, then the question for us will be, have you made a contribution to lowering greenhouse gas emissions? That's the question that will be put to us, and this has to do with freedom. And this is why our energy policy is a policy for freedom, not only in terms of trade or energy, but also in terms of climate action. 6 years ago, the German Federal Constitutional Court made a judgment that actually ordered every German government to make sure that future generations would still have the right to determine their own future, and that means protecting their future, mitigating climate change. This was 6 years ago. We are no longer talking about a distant future. We are not only talking about our children or grandchildren, we are talking about our own lives, about the present. We are seeing the catastrophic weather events, droughts. We're seeing wildfires. We're seeing all this at present. You know this from your own countries. We are seeing this in Germany. We are seeing events that should only have happened around every 100 years. They are now happening twice a year, and the speed is accelerating. Now, these are not events that are very interesting to nature. We are talking about natural disaster, and when we talk about climate action, we are not really talking about protecting the climate, as we say in German, but it's about protecting human lives. So if we want people to be able to self-determine, if we want the world to resolve conflict together, if we want to make self-determination something that is at the heart of politics and policies, well, whoever says yes to all these things has to do this beyond just one legislative term. Climate action policy is a basis, if not a guarantor, for a future in which people can take their own free decisions. So thank you very much on that note, and every fortune for the future.
Better turn around.